Okay, I'm gonna start, Sam, with the easy one. And by the way, anything I say is not gonna be on the final version, so I'm allowed to say anything I want to. Usually it comes earlier, but we'll just go ahead right now. All the people that really kind of were our godfathers, and you were one, have a spouse at home that helps support them. Talk a little bit about Lisa and how she has supported you throughout your political career.
So when I first ran, the kids were 8 and 6, so they were young. So they needed protection, as well as making sure I didn't make any major mistakes, right? Politics is an interesting business. And Lisa was invaluable. She kept the kids straight. She kept them happy. She kept me straight, so she was clearly invaluable. You know, when you're first elected and you show up at restaurants or grocery stores, you're known. And children aren't accustomed to that. They're not used to that lack of privacy. So when you go in the neighborhood restaurant and folks either walk up to the table or they stare, you know, your daughter or your son says, they're staring at us. So it's really important for your wife to not only keep your head on straight, but your children's heads on straight. Humility is an invaluable tool. And Lisa does that very, very well.
I think it's great. That has all the elements that we would want. Talk a little bit about your career so that people, when they watch this, if everything makes it, they're going to know how you got from where you are, started from, rather than where you got.
So it wasn't planned. Lisa and I never talked about being on a ballot, never talked about running for office. We moved into a subdivision in 1987, 2 years after we were married, in East Cobb, and there was still a lot of green land around us. And we kept seeing more and more development and what we considered to be bad development, density for density's sake. And as a result of that, I got active at our homeowners association. And, you know, if you go to a homeowners association and you're a banker, a lawyer, or a small business person, the next thing you know, you're a board member. And I got active in the association. I was made the subdivision representative to the East Cobb Civic Association, and got very active in that space. There were folks like David Hong that were very active and did a great job for our community. And I noticed this impression that some people that wanted to take a pro-homeowner stance accordingly took an anti-business stance. And I thought that was downright foolish, because last time I checked, business people are homeowners. So I immediately tried to find opportunities to mesh the two together. So we overtly got involved in the educational community, got involved with the Cobb Chamber of Commerce, and we weren't anti-growth, we weren't anti-business, because everyone has the same goals: to live in a great place for your family, to be able to have high quality jobs near you live. So I sought to create those partnerships.
Where were you born, and how did you end up getting to Cobb County?
So I was born in Miami, and then we moved to South Jersey when my mom died when I was 5. Dad died when I was 12. Uncle died when I was 14. Graduated high school in South Jersey. Went to American University in D.C., and then my sister kept telling me I was going to go to Emory Law School, which is what I did. So I got a BA and an MA, and then went to Emory Law School for the JD.
We're having, Pam and I are meeting Charlie for lunch today, or dinner. That's what he wanted for his birthday. And we're talking to him about going to a school in D.C. because he loves history. Mm-hmm. What better place to be? So you got Georgetown's there, American University, what else?
Catholic University. American gave me a free ride. So I got a free master's and free bachelor's, and got a fellowship during the master's years. Actually started towards the PhD when I then decided to go to law school.
We'll start digging down just a little deeper. You have legacy, whether you know it or not. What do you think your legacy is going to be, or what should it be? It's a hard question,
So we accomplished a lot, but it was a team mentality. You know, you have 4 other commissioners. They have the same vote you do. You get to sit on other boards like the Water Board and the Health Board, Community Service Board, the Atlanta Regional Commission. But if you can't count to 3, you can't do anything. So we accomplished a lot, but it was because the team, to include not only the 4 other elected officials, but the staff, did a great job of working together and moving the county forward.
So if I'm sitting out 5 years from now and I'm reading another book that Tom Scott wrote, he will write about what people think of you, and what you just described is mostly internal. From the outside, what's going to be your legacy?
Well, the external would frankly be that we worked well with the whole region. I had an excellent rapport with Shirley Franklin. I had an excellent rapport with the elected officials throughout the Atlanta region. We are not an independent island. We are interdependent on each other. When the city of Atlanta does well, the region does well. When the region does well, the city of Atlanta does well. You know, the city, when I was first elected, was probably about 400,000 people. They're now over 500,000 people. When I was first elected, the vast majority of the development was in the suburbs. Now the vast majority of the development is within the city limits of the city of Atlanta. So I think that understanding that we're each interdependent is vital. We made numerous agreements with MARTA while I was in Cobb County. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think your reputation will always be being the collaborator, bringing people together, which leads me to a question that we've heard it so much, and then when we describe it, people understand what we're talking about. Roy Barnes said it on the tape, and it's on that little clip. There's something called the Cobb way of doing things, which is different than most communities. And basically the way people have talked about it, what separates us from other counties, and the fact you've been statewide, you might disagree with this, but leaders get together and work things out, as opposed to getting very vocal and screaming at each other from the mountaintop. I mean, we don't have these race relation riots. We just take care of the business. I want you to talk a little bit about your perspective, why we're different, and use the word Cobb way. There's a way Cobb does it that helps separate us, and always has. I mean, that's why we're where we are.
So we certainly had our low points too. You know, the gay resolution was a big low point for this county and really hurt this county. The county's still dealing with the gay resolution today. But as a general statement, the elected officials in this county, sometimes called the Cobb way, is to actually get in a room and resolve differences of opinion. I think we also were way ahead of the game of acknowledging that the county was going to change. The county was going to be much more diverse, and that you needed to approach that diversity as an opportunity, and that you needed to make sure that your activities embrace that emerging diversity. So I think we understood before others that the county was going to continue to grow, that it was going to attract many more folks that hadn't been born in the South, and that we needed to take advantage of their education and to use it to our benefit.
When I talked to Reverend Travis, I talked to Dan Bonner, talked to Lee Ryan about the whole race issue, and it's in Tom Scott's book. Why have we not seen these incredible, outlandish, violent things like Charlotte? I mean, somehow, some way, we changed, and Tom said this, we changed without having a formal change process. It starts with David Hankerson, the first African American, and so far now has ended up with Joyette Holmes. And we just hadn't had those problems in race relations. You had a lot to do with that. I know you did, because you kept having conversations. So talk a little bit about the whole issue of race.
Look, I spent more time in black churches than white churches. To me, that was a a necessary discussion. You needed to include everyone in the tent rather than to seek to exclude certain people. So I spent a lot of energy with Deanne Bonner. I spent a lot of energy with probably about 10 different ministers of our faith community. It makes us a much stronger community. The time was well worth it. Look at the benefits that have been derived to this county as a result of it. We spent a lot of time on the public safety vein in that regard. We overtly encouraged and instructed the public safety leadership to have meetings in the churches, African American, Asian, Hispanic, Latino. That was vital. That was part of their job, was to make sure that every community knew they were protected, knew that we cared about them. When you have a bad incident, you can't then seek to find the names of those folks in that community to assure them. So, for instance, I spent a good amount of time with numerous Muslim leaders in our community right after 9/11. There are those still in our society today that view every Muslim with suspicion, that choose to mistreat them. The Muslim leadership in our county needs to know that we're there to support them, that our form of government demands that all religions are treated respectfully. And it's just a necessary step if you want to bring everyone to that secure well-being.
Tom mentioned this in his book when he talked about this change going on quietly but effectively. I suspect you're the first Jewish chairman. Did you ever find anything ever said or any behaviors occur because we had a Jewish chairman?
Sure.
Okay, well, would you mind elaborating?
Well, both on the campaign trail as well as when I was in office, there'd be the occasional comment. But you don't let the occasional comment distract you. The comments were few in number. So one of the benefits of Cobb County was how open and willing the residents of our county were, not only for me as a member of the Jewish community, but for aspiring leaders in the African American, Latino, Asian communities. The county is one that treats you based on what you bring to the table, not based on which country club your grandfather belonged to.
You and I worked on something together that probably did a lot of good, although visibly there wasn't a lot to write about, and that was our Hispanic initiative. Jerry Gonzalez kept getting in the middle of this and taking our partnership we were working on down to driver's licenses. So you want to say anything about that?
You know, it was much easier to have the outreach to the African American community than the Latino community. Certain political interests made it much more difficult. It was much harder for the elected leadership and the public safety leadership to earn the trust of the Latino community. But that just meant you had to work that much harder. So I remember, for instance, there was a annual meeting of Latino leadership, and I was one of two statewide officials who came that were elected Republicans. There were two of us. But the room understood that and acknowledged that and understood that we were trying. And that's what folks want to say. It's not instant success. It's long-term effort that counts.
Sam, one thing I would say as part of the Cobb Way, because I've experienced it in other locations, and you probably have too, the unique nature of our cities and county getting along and working together. Even whatever that law is, what shared services, whatever it is, was a model that we went through, and I was facilitating Gordon County. The cities, or at least a couple of the cities, hated the county because of all the stuff that went on in the past.
Yeah.
The other thing was a partnership that existed between you and state agencies like DOT. And routinely had them come up here, we would go down. There was a partnership, we knew each other. And the same thing with other organizations. I want to talk about that a little bit.
So House Bill 489, service delivery, is what you're referencing. When I was first elected chairman, there was not a positive feeling among the 6 cities and the county. There was no reason for that division. It was little things, annoying things, and you got to look at the big picture. So one of the first things I did was I started scheduling a quarterly lunch with all 6 mayors. And then I would literally go to maybe every other month, I'd go have a meal with one of the mayors. I'll always remember the mayor of Austell used to wake up about 4 in the morning. And if you wanted a meeting with him, the latest it could be was about 5:30. So I would show up at a breakfast place on the main street in Austell at 5:30. We'd be out of there by 6:30. And Joe Jerkins, in return for me traveling to Austell and assisting them where we could, was the easiest mayor for me to thereafter deal with. Driving from East Cobb to Austell was not a 10-minute drive, but it was well worth it. I always wanted to meet them on their home turf. I always wanted to see that we cared about them. They're part of the county. So I think historically, House Bill 489 initially created a lot of division. Hopefully now those days are gone.
Would you say that one of the reasons we've been successful in SPLOST is because of that same thing? The cities and county get together, look on projects that need to be done, have an agreement, then run campaigns together.
So I would say that the Chamber of Commerce has been invaluable in the passage of SPLOST for both the county and the school systems. This is a conservative jurisdiction. It doesn't matter who you are, you want your tax dollars spent wisely. And that, of course, forced us to have a conservative program. I remember when I was first elected, about a year later, we offered a SPLOST referendum. It won by 112 votes. Now, the prior 3 before I was elected lost, and they weren't close. The polling showed that the new Superior Court and the expansion of the jail were not popular at all. Let the inmates sleep on the concrete floor. Who needs a new jail? But we understood that a federal judge was going to increase our millage rate to pay for those facilities if we did not pass it within a SPLOST. The transportation side of that vote was very popular, about 80%. But when you put all 3 together, it made for a real tough election. And thankfully, literally by 112 votes, it won. Now, what occurred as a result of that vote? Well, number one, we were able to increase the county's reserves for a rainy day. Number two, we went from a point where necessary M&O, maintenance and operations, elevators, roofs, HVAC systems, were all able to go up to date. Everything was current by the end of that SPLOST. And number three, we were able to make some significant improvements to our county's congestion throughout the county. We partnered with all 6 cities on those road projects. You can't just say you live in a city, you pay for the project, and the county will stay home. When you're a city of 5,000 people, a city of 10,000 people, if the county's not willing to help you, it cannot occur. So that vote made the total difference in our county moving forward from a financial and from a quality of life perspective.
I would also argue, Sam, and you were a big part of this, that the way in which those dollars were used without political concerns or financial concerns is the reason they passed after that. People saw what was going on and felt confident in your leadership to vote yes again.
So you mentioned David Hankerson before. We were overtly a team. It wasn't that he was appointed and I was elected. We were a team. I couldn't have done half of what I sought to do without David Hankerson. And of course, on the other side of that, you had 4 commissioners that were helpful, that were very instructive and very supportive. But it takes the agency heads, it takes the level below, it takes all the levels of government to succeed.
We talked to a lot of people who knew Ernest Barrett, who arguably
Sure.
was a successful. He had a certain leadership style that got success. I want you to talk a little bit about your leadership, and we'll get to specific things later. But how would you characterize your leadership style in effectiveness? How did you get results?
Well, clearly, when I was in office, it was very different than when Ernest Barrett was in office. You couldn't go to the cabinet, take out a bottle of scotch and toast, and then you had an agreement, and the lawyers weren't even part of the process. But Ernest was amazingly successful and invaluable to the growth of the county. He had a greater effect 30 years later than he ever possibly could have imagined due to his leadership and his vision for our county. When I was active, there was some social media, but just a little social media. So that meant you literally had to go everywhere because you had to touch as many hands as you could to get that support and that trust. So that meant, for instance, every quarter I did another town hall in one of the 4 districts, and I would invite the school board members and the mayor and council in that area of our county. You had to be seen and you had to listen. Listen only has 6 letters, but it is a huge word. And if you demonstrate the ability of active listening, you can accomplish anything.
Well, it's interesting, Sam, because that's what we heard about Ernest Barrett, the stories about him. He wasn't the brightest guy in the world, but he listened. He got people together at breakfast and listened. Now, there's a downside to that, obviously. People telling you crap that you know is not worth the crap, and you have to nod your head and write it on the flip chart. So,
look, without his leadership for water and sewer, the growth couldn't have happened. Folks wouldn't have moved here. There wouldn't have been this fantastic school system. Let's mention that. County commissioners and mayors love to take credit for low taxes for everything they do. The local elected officials that get the least credit and accomplish the most are the school board members and the superintendents and the principals and the teachers. If you don't have a good school system, we don't need to talk about mayors and county commissioners, because folks aren't coming to your community without a good school system.
So what was responsible for our school system? As you saw it from the top of the county, what have you seen that's driven our school system to be who it is today? Is it luck?
No. It's parents that took a very active stand, both at the school level and above. When you look at those board meetings for both school systems, when you look at the PTSA leadership in our county, the parents are very, very active. Look at all the schools that have foundations that raise money in addition to their tax dollars. We were blessed to have citizen activists that cared about their children's education and demanded excellence from the school systems.
We also were very fortunate, also, I think, to have good superintendents along the way.
No, absolutely.
They didn't last long, but they were all good people.
Well, the life of a school superintendent is amazingly short, despite the fact that it takes years of a policy to see the difference. So it's a vicious circle. When you have a superintendent that lasts 5 years, that lasts 7 years, that's very promising for the community.
You mentioned it earlier, but Cobb County is not an island. It requires partnerships at the state level. For that matter, at the federal level. Talk a little bit about the partnerships you helped create. I know you have to go to D.C. to get construction dollars, transportation dollars, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about partnerships outside of Cobb County that I think makes us a little unique.
Let's look, for instance, at, right now Cobb County is seeking to improve I-20 and I-285. It significantly affects two other counties. You got to work with those two other counties. You have to work with all the elected officials, both local, state, and federal, to have that project come to fruition. That takes an awful lot of time. We used to deal, while I was chair, with a lot of traffic coming from Paulding County. Well, it served no purpose to go to the local newspaper and just criticize Paulding County. That was a worthless exercise. The value was in working with Paulding County officials to determine which road projects would be helpful in ameliorating the traffic congestion. So you had to have those meetings. I mean, I remember I went down to a Georgia DOT meeting for Paulding County. None of the project was in Cobb County. And the commissioner of Georgia DOT looked at me and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because if this project isn't approved, all those cars are going to continue to hurt the residents in Northwest Cobb. And with this project, there's going to be relief for both Paulding County and Cobb County." And he said, "Well, there's a limited amount of dollars and you're encouraging the money on that project." I said, "Yeah, and I really hope you say yes." Because, at the end of the day, if we're not willing to help each other, we shouldn't be in those positions.
Sam, as we go along, if you think of stories, and you're good on your feet, you think of some funny stories. Please. That's
Okay.
like we interviewed Ward Barnes, story after story.
Sure.
When we talk to Max Bacon, we're going to get story after story.
Yes, you will.
And as we go along, if you think of something that is a funny story or serious story.
Well, so like for instance, I don't think this is funny, but so two things I'll say about Joe Lee Thompson. Joe was old Cobb. We had an issue with retirees where many of those retirees, their pensions were small. I mean, really small. And every year those retirees would ask for help. And the common refrain was, well, you got retirees that are getting a big check from the county. Why are we helping them? And that was at the expense of the longtime retirees that really needed that increase. And out of the blue, Joe Lee says, I think we should give a nice bump to the retirees that currently get less than, maybe $30,000 a year in their retirement, and do no increase for the folks who get more than that amount. It was ingenious. We were helping those who needed it the most. Another example, we're getting ready to do the courthouse, the new Superior Court. Joe Lee walks in my office one day, and we used to call it walk the halls. We'd go talk to each other. And Joe Lee said, for another $7 million, we can put another floor on the courthouse. Now, they don't need that now, just a shell. They don't need that now, but we know they will. Isn't it cheaper to do $7 million more now and have space for growth than for them to be looking for another building 5-10 years from now? And I immediately said, "Okay, Joe, we got 2 votes already. We need 1 more." And it was 5-0. I mean, he had a great idea. And that was the value of encouraging those discussions, encouraging folks to trust each other and to work with each other. If you're going to snipe at each other, nothing gets done.
When you were chairman of this county, you worked incredibly well with the state legislature. Our group and other groups, talk about how you managed to maintain a relationship so you could get things done under the gold dome?
So it was actually tricky because there was a lot of jealousy of Cobb County, a lot of jealousy of Gwinnett County. I remember when the lieutenant governor once went up to me and said, "Oh, it's the great state, the great state of Cobb." I said, "Governor, we make you look good. Help us." And then folks like Roy were able to help us with the lieutenant governor at that time, Mark Taylor. So there was some jealousy. That was the biggest issue we had to deal with. Why should we help you? And we'd say, well, look at all the tax dollars you're getting. Look at all the property tax and sales tax and other taxes you're getting from Cobb County residents. QBE, all the dollars that were leaving Cobb and going to the state. So we spent time doing it, but I absolutely looked for value. I'll give you one little story. Once again, not funny, but a story. So the ARC needed to change the legislation on how much money went into a congressional district. One of the changes post the census, congressional districts, David Scott, 13th, was given a stretch of 285, and then it went out from there. Well, repairing an interstate of X number of lanes is expensive. So when you consider the number of people in a congressional district versus the miles of interstate, David's district had a disproportionately high number of interstate miles. So we were trying to get the bill passed, and Tom Graves was in the legislature at the time, and he was the subcommittee approach chair for transportation. And he said, "Sam, all you people at the ARC want is more money." I said, "Tom, let me show you a map. Let me show you the population numbers. This is what we're trying to deal with." And he looked at the map, he looked at the numbers, and he said, "I've been meaning to make a change. If I do your change with the change I want, so it helps Gordon County, a rural county, in addition to this problem you're having along Clayton County, will you be okay with that?" I said, "Go for it. We will openly support it." And the bill was passed, and we got it done. And it was a sign of showing that we could work together, rural and urban. It's got to be, what do we do for the whole state? Just like, what do we do for the whole county? One of the things that concerns me a little bit now is whether commissioners are more concerned about their individual district than the county as a whole. You may be elected by a fourth of the county, but you represent the whole county, and you need to be supporting the whole county.
Sam, when you look at the milestones in our history, Bill
Byrne?
No, not Bill Byrne. Ryder. MDJ Ryder died.
Bill Kinney.
Bill Kinney. We talked about it. I always said that the three big milestones in Cobb were Bell Bomber Plant coming in, and then Ernest Barrett preparing the infrastructure for growth, and then the Braves and all that brought with it. But there's some subsets in between. Mm-hmm. And right before Bill died, I had one brief conversation. He thought the Braves, and it brought Atlanta United, changed Franklin Rock, will end up being as big, if not bigger, than the Bell Bomber Plant. I have argued, and I'll get your comment, that the Leo Frank situation was a big milestone. The gay resolution was a big milestone, and several others along the way. Talk about what you think the major milestones were. And in fact, I'll go back to Tom Scott said when David Hankerson was selected, that was a big, significant start of what we've eventually done. So talk about what you think the major milestones have been in Cobb's history.
So I concur that Bill Byrne's decision to appoint David Hankerson as the county manager was a game changer for our county. Followed up by David's great leadership and the fantastic job he did thereafter. I don't frankly think Brave Stadium would have occurred without the Cobb Energy Performing Arts Center. Some of us watched Gwinnett County build the Gwinnett Arena, and Wayne Hill took a lot of grief for that decision. And folks saw where the Gwinnett Arena was a very positive change for Gwinnett County. And as a result of the success of Gwinnett Arena, John Williams brought forward the idea again of the Performing Arts Center. Well, actually, John Williams had the idea before the Gwinnett Arena. Folks just weren't interested in the discussion. And then Earl Smith and John Williams wanted to go back to that idea, and we were able, by a 5-0 vote, to approve the financial structure to make that a reality. Now, what that did was not only give us a great venue for the performing arts, but all of a sudden, when the Atlanta Opera and the Atlanta Ballet were going to be stepping foot into Cobb County post-gay resolution, that was another game changer. It changed everything at that point. It was like, enough already of the gay resolution. Let's move forward. And at the same time, a lot of folks in Atlanta wanted a new performing arts center, and it wasn't going to happen. So we took the lead and we put our money where our mouth was at that time. I think following the Cobb Energy Performing Arts Center, it was much easier for the Braves to say, how about that site? Now, incidentally, most people don't know this, but the Falcons wanted that site. The Falcons met with me about that site. I expressed no interest in that proposal. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, there was another discussion, and I reaffirmed my lack of interest. And the comment was, so why are you not interested? I said, well, number one, you're just talking about a stadium. There's 8 games a year. The traffic will be abominable. I don't frankly think that the Falcons will leave downtown. And if you're looking to potentially leave downtown, it should be the MARTA station at 285 on the northeast side. I'll never know whether the Falcons were serious about that or not, because I never gave it an option. What the Braves presented with the Battery to include the park was something very, very special that wasn't a part of the proposal from the Falcons. And once again, 82 games a year versus 8. The residential commercial investment of billions of dollars around that stadium, huge amenity for this county.
There's a lot of evidence to support your leadership, Mr. Chairman, one of which was being selected to chair ARC. Also, I should have said this at the very beginning, don't be modest, okay? Well, don't, this is fact. Why were you elected to be chairman of ARC and stay in that role for so long? You might want to repeat that, because I'm not going to be on something about ARC or our role in ARC.
So I was honored to serve as chairman for the Atlanta Regional Commission for a nice amount of time. I followed Wayne Hill. And I think that the main reason that happened, candidly, was I changed the perspective that the suburbs needed to work with the city of Atlanta. I was able to get support of the Atlanta elected officials and the citizen members from Atlanta. And as a result of that became a really strong alliance. It was really important that foolish discussion of us versus them was removed from the table.
I think over a period of time, and you were responsible for this to some degree, the brand of Cobb County was modified. the gay resolution hung around, and we were viewed in a lot of circles as an isolationist kind of county because we didn't buy into MARTA. But over a period of time, and you had a lot to do with this, Cobb became more of a regional player, more acceptable player in what's going on. Talk about how you changed, and you're responsible for a lot of this, Sam, how you changed the brand of Cobb County.
So you changed the perception of Cobb County by frankly saying the right thing at the right time. You have to have the guts to say what needs to occur. You needed to be able to say, we got to work with the city of Atlanta. You know, folks don't wake up one day and say, I want to move a corporate headquarters to Marietta. You know, first there's that discussion that they're going to move to Georgia, they're going to move to Metro Atlanta, and then you get to the granular level of where are we moving. So y'all needed to play nicely in the same sandbox. And there were numerous times that I would make statements and others would sort of just shake their head and smile. You know, the concept C that is discussed now with the new ATL, the Regional Transit Board, Shirley Franklin and I came up with the original concept C design while I chaired the ARC. And I went up to Mayor Franklin and I said, we need to do this because we need to know where the future transit should be. And she said, so you're serious, huh? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, I will do it and I will support you, but you understand you're walking in a hornet's nest. And I said, well, if I don't mind walking in it, you shouldn't either. And we did the study. We approved the plan. I don't think there were any negative votes. Now, from my perspective, the Galleria needed transit then. The Galleria needs transit now. It's my hope that one day Cobb's elected officials will do what's right. MARTA needs to head to the Galleria. MARTA needs to head towards Six Flags. Thereafter, we don't have the density for that type of heavy rail, and it would be a waste of money. But if you look at young people today, until we provide that mode of traffic, we're going to lose a lot of high-paying corporate positions because young people want to rely on transit.
The one thing I think was really useful, it was kind of interesting. I did a facilitation session with Earl Ellis. He wanted economic development.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to meet with he and his staff. And he said, the only way I'm going to do that is if the Chamber of Commerce doesn't come. This is going to be an economic development plan for the county. But he didn't want the Chamber to be there. And I got to thinking, what kind of relationships does he have with business?
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about the county, its relationship to the business community, vis-a-vis the chamber or other organizations like business associations.
So we always had a very strong relationship with the chamber. As I mentioned earlier, but for the chamber, I don't know if we ever would have passed a SPLOST for the county or the school systems. It seems silly to me when folks would say you're too close to the chamber. You mean the places that help the jobs that you rely on to pay your mortgage? Explain that one to me. So if you become a mouthpiece for the chamber, then you're misplacing your role. But if you constructively work with the chamber to improve your community, that's a win-win. So I showed up to all the chamber events that I could put in the schedule. And I never had a comment from a chamber leader or chamber staff that I thought was overtly for the benefit of the chamber and not for the county too.
Evidence of that is the fact that one of the most prestigious awards that the chamber makes is in your name.
Not anymore.
They took it away?
Right.
Well, that was a mistake. Tell me if you thought the election of Roy Barnes as governor helped us as a county move along?
Look, Roy tried to do too much too fast. Many people make that mistake. I don't fault him for trying to do that. I appreciate the effort. Roy took holy hell for changing the state flag. God bless him for pushing the change of the state flag. That was needed years before. Roy sought to make many changes to our educational system. That was needed for years before. So I think Roy was a one-term governor because he wasn't willing to let anything stay till the second. While that may have been a political mistake, his heart was in the right place, and he sought to make a lot of improvements. I think his service as governor certainly showed a broader view of Cobb County, a more accepting view of Cobb County. But I knew that already. Roy knew that already. Cobb County has very different areas, but it's all about education. It's all about giving your children a better tomorrow than your today. So from my perspective, we were both the benefit of a fantastic county that strove for excellence.
Sort of in that realm, I want to ask you about a couple of people and get your comment. There are two people that come up over and over again as having an impact on our county in a big way. Would love for your comment. One was Senator Isaacson, which we might end up dedicating this to him because everybody talks about it. Mm-hmm. Otis Brumby, which we won't dedicate it to. But those are two characters, and I would tell you, Otis comes up all the time. It runs from very negative to very positive. And then there's this whole historical perspective that people back away from their emotions and talk about it. So let's start with Otis. You had a unique relationship with Otis. Why?
Well, we worked together a lot. I worked a lot with Otis. I used to tease him that I'm not really sure he knew there was an East Cobb except for Friday Night Football. But because they understood that would sell paper, so they started covering unincorporated Cobb schools for football. I asked him to cover the schools more for everything else. But I thought he challenged you to be a better elected official. Now, many people would say he was too tough. Too tough is better than too weak. So I thought he always pushed the county to do a better job. I think a weakness was he really totally exclusively covered the county and the city of Marietta. I would be astounded on how other cities would have major items on their agenda and no one would be there from the paper. And I thought that was a shame. But I thought as to the city of Marietta and the county, he made us better. I think overall he was a very positive influence. It was interesting. One day we had a horrific murder. And Otis called me up and he said, I know you're not going to respond to me. He said, but I'm thinking this murder occurred due to X, Y, and Z. Because I've been in the news business a long time and I'm pretty confident about that, but I can't write it because I don't have sources. And he said, now I know you're not going to be my source, but this is what I'm thinking. And I reached out to Mickey Lloyd after the call, who was our director of public safety at the time. And I said, so Otis Brumby takes the perspective that the murder occurred due to X. And Mickey said, and in 2 more days, he'll be able to write exactly that in the Marietta paper. So he knew his business very, very well.
What would cause you to be on the bad side of Big Otis?
Well, he wasn't really crazy about what he called the rain tax. We had a problem with flooding. There's only so much money to go around. And he wanted stormwater detention to occur within the current budget. The current budget was not sufficient. There still is no fund for stormwater, and the county's still not close to being able to fully manage that problem. But he was just totally against that concept of charging for impervious surfaces. Those jurisdictions, to include other cities in the county that did it, are in a much better shape than the unincorporated areas of the county now.
Well, we've heard from several people who were on the good and bad side of those, that a couple things you never did those. You never lied to him.
True.
You never covered anything up that
Right.
he could find. And you better not address open records in a negative way. So talk about this.
So Otis had a lot of passion for the sunshine laws. Unfortunately, everyone pays attention to the Open Records Act and doesn't really pay sufficient attention to the Open Meetings Act. When you go to a meeting and it lasts 10 minutes and it has a whole booklet of items, you weren't at the right meeting. I still haven't been able to push that point with the press. They're still only interested in open records. But Otis's love and passion for strict enforcement of the sunshine laws, number one, was 100% accurate and 100% needed. You should expect that of any government, local, state, or federal. Now, the feds have failed at it for a long, long time. The state still has an act that's too weak as it relates to the state. And local governments get the brunt of it, but it's better for someone to follow it than no one to follow it. But one story I'll mention with regard to Otis. So, Otis and Philip Goldstein didn't regularly get along really well. That's not to say that one party was wrong and one party was right. They just loved to disagree. When we were working on the renovation of the Strand Theater, Otis felt very strongly that Philip and his family needed to demonstrate generosity, and that the negotiated agreement between the Friends of the Strand and the Goldstein family had to be fair to both concerned. And he wrote numerous columns, and he was very concerned about Philip taking advantage of the city and the county in that regard. When we got to the final agreement, I actually shared it with Otis. And Otis sat down and Otis read it, and he said, Philip's doing the right thing here. This is good. Philip's doing the right thing. So when we went up to the huge foundation in downtown Atlanta, they were going to make a visit to the Strand Theater before they determined whether to give us a sizable amount of money. Otis was already not in good health. It was the summer. There was no air conditioning in the Strand.
What was time frame?
To be honest, I hesitate to say the year. But it was the heat of the summer. It was over 100 degrees on the second floor of the theater. There were barely planks of wood to walk on. You had to be careful or you could fall. And the heads of the foundation came for a visit at Otis's request. And we were all sweating profusely. I mean, it was hot up there. And Otis looked at the leadership of the foundation and said, I don't get along too well with the Goldstein family, but my foundation's writing a check. Philip's done a good job with this endeavor, and it's deserving of your support too. I don't think it took 2 weeks after that till we got a huge financial commitment from that foundation. Now, Otis never put in the paper that he attended any visit for the Strand. He never suggested that he did anything to help raise that large contribution from that foundation. But he did at his own peril because his health was not good. So if you were to mention in a sentence, Otis and Philip in doing the right thing for the community. Otis did a great job for the community with the rebirth of the Strand Theater. It very well may have never occurred without Otis's request to that foundation.
How about hiding things or being non-truthful? Otis wasn't real keen on that either, was it?
Well, look, Otis wasn't keen on not telling him the truth, but, you know, if you're stupid enough to be dishonest with the paper, you're stupid enough to get the wrath that follows it.
When I went to Sonny Walker's funeral, and I knew her pretty well, worked on the East Cobb Park thing with her and some other things. I heard some things at her funeral that I did not know. And when we went to Otis's funeral, I heard a lot of things that I didn't know and nobody else knew. The story about buying the piano or organ. I just heard a lot of things. What kind of things have you done, Sam, that people need to know long after you're gone? Seriously, what are some of these quiet things that you're proud of that never reach the newspaper and people don't know?
No, I'm a small player. These other folks did a lot.
That's not true. Come tell me.
Next question.
Okay. Here's a statement.
Let's go to Johnny, though. Don't forget Johnny. Okay. So I was getting active in the community through the East Cobb Civic Association. I was starting to show up in a newspaper story once a month or so. And I'm at the local gas station, and I'm pumping gas. And Johnny Isaacson walks up to me to introduce himself to me, to say hello to me. And he said, "Hi, I'm Johnny." And I said, I know who you are, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. And he said, "Well, I've just been reading in the newspaper and you're doing some nice stuff for the community, and I just really appreciate it." And I'm thinking, okay, here's a member of the state legislature going up to a gentleman that's getting active in the nonprofit community, and he reached out to me. Now, I candidly hadn't seen him at the gas station. He was at the far set of pumps. And I thought, oh my God, that is a special individual. And that was the first time I met him. Another story. Johnny's running for Senate. He's running against Mac Collins and Herman Cain. Now, the betting money is Mac Collins is going to win because Mac is rural Georgia, albeit south of Atlanta, and Johnny's Cobb / Sandy Springs. So we're in Savannah at the summer meeting of ACCG, Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, and the chairman of Fayette County is going to introduce Mac, and I'm going to introduce Johnny. And as Johnny gets into the old Civic Center, he immediately goes down to the bottom floor, which is the exhibition hall. And he's shaking hands. He's starting to talk to folks. All these rural county commissioners are jumping in for their picture with Johnny. Mac is sitting there, or more appropriately, standing there. It was readily apparent to the chairman of Fayette County and the chairman of Cobb County that the election was over. Because unbeknownst to many, Johnny had already been traveling the state and making friends nowhere near his congressional district and proving to them that he cared. And by the time he finished his talk and the time Mac Collins, who's a nice guy, no negative to say, it was clear that the vast majority of those county commissioners had already agreed they were going to endorse the guy from Atlanta and not the guy from rural Georgia for that Republican primary for Senate. No one outworked Johnny on the campaign trail, And no one outworked Johnny for constituent services. You know, when you talk about what people don't know, Johnny has taken more trips with Parkinson's to Asia and Africa to both assist Georgians and assist our country than you'd ever be aware of. He doesn't do it with a camera. He doesn't do it with a microphone. He doesn't come back and say, I just returned from Kenya. He just does it. I've never seen an elected official that did more without seeking any attention than Johnny Isakson. When you talk about big projects like the port, when you talk about other needs that this state has had, there's only one Johnny. I've never met a public servant that in any way, shape, or form compares to him in action.
So what specifically do you think his greatest contributions have been to Cobb County? And that goes back when he was in the community, and he and John Williams did lots of stuff together. Of course, as a state house.
Okay, there's too many to say, but let me ask you to assume, for instance, that one of the large checks that Sonny Walker was able to get for the East Cobb Park was an anonymous foundation check from a foundation within the city of Atlanta that Johnny got and never took credit for. When Payne College in Augusta, non-Cobb, was getting ready to go under, Johnny traveled to Augusta to meet with a lot of the Augusta business leadership and said, Payne needs your help. Write the check to keep it open. It's open. Going back to Cobb, you don't ever think that widening of Johnson Ferry would have occurred without Johnny, do you? I mean, the whole time I was working with GDOT and Mike Ken and his successors to build that project, every time Fulton County would say, rightly or wrongly, and this new city of Sandy Springs, we want a linear park. We want this improvement. We want that improvement. It was always another $10 or $20 million. Johnny would get it in a transportation bill in Congress to give GDOT that $10 or $20 million to make it happen. He may have gotten more money for Sandy Springs for amenities associated with that road project than the actual cost of the road project. Never took credit for it. Never put any announcement out about it. He just did it. So you were talking before about me working with GDOT. A bunch of those meetings are to help Fulton County. And Johnny did it at the same time the folks in Sandy Springs were yelling at him, not wanting the project.
Did I ever tell you about the pound cake story? Pam every year makes pumpkin bread for several people, and Johnny's one of them. Just wraps it up and puts it on his front porch. And she did it for a lot of people. But anyway, one Saturday morning, Pam and I were outside, and I was raking stuff up. Here comes this older, I won't say it's Buick or something, comes driving up, and it's Johnny. And he gets out and said, "I want to give you something. This is my grandmother's special recipe pound cake." We said thank you and all that. He didn't have any more in his car. He made a special trip over to give us pound cake. What U.S. senator would ever do anything like that?
So Johnny, look, when Johnny lost 2 statewide races in a row, he was as popular as when he was in office. You can't count on one hand the number of elected officials that are very popular post-electoral defeat as they were before the electoral defeat. You know, the fact that a gentleman he lost to, a governor, called him up to lead the state school board to assist him, that's not supposed to happen. Because too few people actually care about what's important rather than their own careers. Johnny's the exception.
One thing I've always admired about Johnny Isaacson, as opposed to lip service, he really cares about our veterans. And he actually did National Guard drills out at the Dobbins.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about your perspective, because we've got a major military installation here, and he's focused on veterans. Why? And same sort of thing, Sam, it's real. It's not politics.
So when you talked before about Cobb, I could have easily included the base. When Lee Ryant was the head of Lockheed here, Lee could not talk to any of the federal elected officials about some of the issues occurring in their needs. He was restricted. But that restriction did not relate to other elected officials. So I would often talk to Lee, and it was just happenstance that I would thereafter talk to Johnny about different issues, different concerns that the base had. I think it's fair to say that the base probably wouldn't exist today if it weren't for Johnny. There was a time where there was a huge push to close this base and move everything to the Texas facility.
Well, you might want to just go ahead and add that the importance of that was if the base closed, Lockheed would close and move somewhere else.
Right.
Add that to it, please.
So, when you think of the base, Lockheed and Dobbins constructively worked to maximize the cost of running it, splitting the cost of the runway, for instance. If one goes, the other shortly follows. It's a team. So you need to make sure that both Dobbins and Lockheed are secure, or they both fall. When we had BRAC for the Naval Air Station, I immediately worked with General Poitras to move the National Guard headquarters to the property. And twice I had meetings with Governor Perdue where he said, would you explain to me why you're working with General Poitras, wanting the National Guard to go there rather than use that property for economic development for your county? And I said, Governor, the transmission lines going to the base are secure. The water and wastewater is handled by Lockheed for that area. The cost for Smyrna or Cobb to put in new lines to service a part of that base for private economic development are too high a price. And by the way, the next time there's a BRAC, the effect on the security of the base due to private economic development will probably be the death knell of the base in Lockheed on that property. We ended up being the first BRAC installation to have a federally approved resolution, that being for the National Guard headquarters. And it was sort of funny. I remember one day I got a call from the military and they said, so we want to name the National Guard headquarters after General Clay. Are you okay with that? And I'm going, I don't have a clue what makes you think that I have a say in this discussion, but of course I'm okay with it. I'm just thrilled to have the National Guard on the property because from my perspective, the more federal assets you put on that property, the safer it is. Bring it a little forward. I think the world of Tim Lee, my successor, but we had some differences. Tim wanted to use a piece of Lockheed's property that they did no longer need for a fire training facility. Georgia Tech wanted that property to grow GTRI, Georgia Tech Research Institute. So Governor Deal was getting hounded by Tim, who wanted it for a fire training academy. And I finally called up Governor Deal and I said, Governor, this is Sam, the guy that lives in Cobb County. Forget the current job of AG. I'm telling you now, please don't listen to the chairman and use that property for fire training. Use that for Georgia Tech. That's a much better use of that property, and it's much more consistent with uses to maintain the integrity of the base and Lockheed and keep it open. So I was naturally thrilled when Governor Deal made the decision that the GTRI would get the use of that property.
Sam, that's in your world of accomplishment. That's a big one, because getting Georgia Tech Research Institute to stay there and grow was important. It's eventually going to have another 1,200 maybe jobs. It's a big deal. And if we ever have a BRAC, you got sitting on that runway an asset that you can leverage, and you know what they do there, right? Research is, it's all military related anyway. So.
Right. But that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, well, I know, but not everybody does those sort of things.
Yeah.
Let's talk about John Williams.
Okay.
He's a little bit like Otis in that he did a lot of things people didn't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
He generally liked people to know about it, but he wasn't the most modest person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But we wouldn't be here today without John Williams. So talk about the legacy of John Williams.
So John had vision. John didn't live in Cobb. He wasn't from Cobb, but he loved Cobb. And he wanted this county to be the best it could be. John never asked me for a single thing. John never said, I have a zoning coming up and I could use your help. He never went there. He never went close to going there, even though that would have been ethical, legal, etc. John spent all his energy on improving the community. And the vision he had for the Galleria Authority, for the Performing Arts Center, none of that would have happened without John Williams. When I walked 3 blocks from our new home, Glover Park, good part of that is due to John Williams giving back. John was a tremendous philanthropist for our county. And while he did tell some people what he did, there's a lot that isn't known.
Go back real quick to Johnny Isaacson, so we have it on the record. Johnny Isaacson was the first person in history,
right,
in Georgia, to have House, State Senate, U.S. House, U.S. Senate. And you can add that he was the only senator that had chaired 2 committees, which were VA and ethics.
Ethics.
Yeah.
So, Johnny was my state house, my state senator, my congressman, my senator, chaired 2 committees, only senator to chair 2 committees, ethics and veterans. That's impressive, but that's not really the issue. The issue is Johnny never changed. The same individual who's our senior senator is the same individual was our state house member. Often when politicians are successful and they get more responsibility, their egos get the best of them and they become unmanageable. Johnny never had that issue. Johnny always maintained his humility and his understanding of strong ethical fiber.
Sam, there's a big difference between being a district commissioner and being a chair. When you took over that role as chairman, what were your, at the very beginning, what were your 3 top priorities?
Well, one was frankly to have a commission that worked together, that there was a team approach. Another was frankly to have a SPLOST, because we were going down when it came to operations maintenance. And a third was to reach my hand across the river and significantly improve relations with the city of Atlanta.
What do you think Cobb's biggest assets are?
Its people. Has the most educated workforce in the state, and the people are very giving. It's if you look at the number of Cobb counties that are active in nonprofits, both in our county but also our region, that each and every day seek to improve our county and our region. There is, and I'm overtly including the schools in that regard, there's an ethos here that's very, very special.
Won't you complete this sentence? I'm going back and forth, but this will be good. And this is factual, by the way. This happened in a meeting not too long ago that I had. Sam Olens was a wonderful chairman, as told by many on his staff and many other folks, because, finish the sentence. Why does staff like you? And you and I both know if you don't have staff on your side, you're pushing a string uphill. But why do you think staff respected you so much?
Because I cared for them. You gotta have. It's a team. David Hankerson, when he would walk down the hall and he'd see whether it was a brand new employee or a 30-year employee, he'd smile at them, he'd shake their hand, he'd ask how they were doing. Every employee deserves that, both from senior staff management and elected officials. If you don't take the time to express your thanks to your employees, that's just as important as to your voters. I remember it was really interesting. One day when I was a new district commissioner, I walked in the Dunkin' Donuts on Johnson Ferry Road. It's now closer to the river, but the Dunkin' Donuts on Johnson Ferry Road. And I was walking out with a cup of coffee and God knows something fattening that I didn't need. And this dad was walking in with his son, and he commented that there were numerous cops in there, and they're just on a break having a jelly donut on our dime. And he's telling this to his son, probably 9 years old or whatever. And I said, sir, when you call 911, do you ask them how that jelly donut's doing, or are you asking them to bust their tail and help you? And he sort of looked at me and he said, you're Sam Olens, right? I said, and I could care less whether you ever vote for me, fella. What a terrible message to teach your son.
When you were chair, public safety in general has always been a challenge to get officers who are paid enough for what they're really worth and that sort of thing. How did you earn the respect of public safety while you were chairman? Because it obviously isn't there right now. So,
well, number one, they were properly paid then. And a lot of that credit goes to Bill Byrne. He had started that way before me. The salaries were very competitive when Bill Byrne was chair, and it was my job to keep it that way. Now, the other step I was able to make was we actually hired more public safety while I was chair, because with the growth of the county, we needed more police officers, more firefighters, etc. But, and incidentally, I'd show up to the FOP meetings. I'd show up to the precincts and say hello to them. You know, I had a policy where I would bring a dozen or 2 dozen, depending on how many folks would be there. You go to GDOT, you go to the water system, you go to the fire stations, you go to where your employees are and you show them that you care for them. You just don't do it when it's time for re-election.
What advice would you give? Our documentary is going to stop at 2019 for the most part. what advice, based on your observation of history,
Mhm.
your observation of your own history, what advice would you give the leaders of the future based on what you feel and know?
Don't worry about whether you win or lose the next election. Do your job. If you're not interested in improving the county, and if you're more interested in that next election, leave now.
That echoes what Roy Barnes said.
Pardon?
That echoes what Roy
Martin
Barnes said.
said very much the same thing.
I would always have that person say, "You're being too nice to the city of Atlanta. That's going to hurt you." How did it hurt me? My last election here, I was unopposed. The election before, my opponent got 18%. Just sit there and have the guts to do what's right.
Here's a question that I've asked several times. What had been, when you were serving, what were the barriers to change? Anybody likes changing, even if it's good. How were you successful in changing, making change happen? Some small, some large. How'd you do that?
It's no different than with the county staff. You spend time talking to people, winning them over, earning their trust. When the East Cobb commissioner became the chairman of the county, Austell and Powder Springs weren't jumping for joy, right? The opposite end of the county. Show up at their events. Show up at their nonprofit events, their civic events. Spend time with them. Time cures all these issues.
All right, this is, what did you learn as a chairman that made you so effective as an AG? What had you learned? What experiences, life experiences and work experiences allowed you to run successfully as AG of this state, as a Cobb citizen, and do it so well? What did you learn?
So if you treat people nicely, you'd be amazed what will follow. I'll give you an example. When I was first elected, CCT was an embarrassment. The bus system, it was terrible. It was always late. Air conditioning, maybe. Heat, maybe. The contractor was doing an abysmal job. And that was just when email had started. And the worst thing someone could do to you was send you an email with capital letters. Boy, how time has changed. And there was a gentleman who used to send the chairman and me emails about his dissatisfaction with the bus service because, he took it to go downtown every day to work. My predecessor barked back. I simply apologized that the service was poor, and we were working on a new proposal to get a new company to take care of the service. When I announced that I was going to run for Attorney General, I get an email from this guy who says, so I don't know whether you remember me or not, but I'm from the area around Valdosta, and I have a brother who's really active in that part of Georgia, in southwest Georgia. And I've told him he needs to meet with you. So the first time you're around Tifton, let him drive up from Valdosta. And maybe you just got the head of your AG campaign for southwest Georgia out of my brother. Well, other than creating a really good friendship with his brother, this gentleman was an amazing worker for me in that area. Never took a dime, never even would take money for gas. So if you treat people nicely, amazing things happen when you least expect it. Whether you call it the golden rule, whether you call it the Cobb way, whatever you want to call it, if you never get too big for your own shoes and you do the right thing to help people, people will take care of you.
Now, this one I absolutely got to ask you to be, not to be modest about. From the time you came in, identified the priorities, brought about change, and then went to AG, what would have been the downside if you had a know-nothing guy that what's his name that beat Earl Smith. You know, somebody came in instead of you that did nothing. How would life be different in Cobb County?
You know, I don't think any one person makes that big of a difference, to be honest. I think they would have been a one-term chairman. You know, if you have a chairman that's not willing to make the tough decisions, I think the public sees right through that and you become a one-year chairman. 4 years doesn't end the world. 4 years slows you down. You know, elected officials come and go. Staff is what's most important because staff is not there for a single term. Staff is hopefully there for a career.
But the staff that you select, I mean, you got to select the right people, and if you're a do-nothing, you just put anybody in there. You know, I think you've always done a good job of evaluating talent and putting the right people in job. I think you underestimate how important that is.
No, I don't underestimate it, but that once again was a team with David Hankerson. It's inappropriate to list that for me. That was a team. You know, it was actually funny. Towards the end of my time, my last big hire was Faye DeMassimo to head Cobb DOT. Faye worked for a federal highway, but she was not a PE. She was not a professional engineer. She had a whole bunch of experience in transportation, but she wasn't a transportation engineer. And after looking at potential candidates, I wanted the county to hire Faye. Normally, David Hankerson and I were on the same page. David was a little concerned about hiring someone who wasn't a PE. You know, don't forget we had a prior PE, Jim Croy, who was outstanding. I don't think, you know, you can do better. Jim Croy did such a great job for the county in a high growth time frame. And David was concerned. So I said, okay, David, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have Faye meet with Jim Croy. And if Jim is impressed with Faye, then you're going to listen to Jim. And he said, you have Faye talk to Jim, and let's talk from there. Well, Jim ended up being Faye's biggest cheerleader. And Jim went up to David and said, put her on the agenda to approve her appointment as the county DOT director. And Faye, from my perspective, did a fantastic job. In all the time I've been in Cobb, she would be the second most effective DOT director to Jim Croy. We have a brand new director now. It would be she hasn't been there long enough so that I'm not making any negative comments. She comes across very sharp, and I like her, but she's been there a year. So Jim was the one who said, I don't care if she's a PE. The lady knows what she's doing, and she'll do a darn good job, and let's make her the DOT director. But when you talk about your staff, David spent a lot of time on that too, if not more time. And there's a lot of things that a chairman can potentially get the credit for, but it doesn't happen without an outstanding county manager.
You were probably involved in this, but another pretty major milestone, or milestones actually, was the merger of Chattahoochee Tech, North Metro Tech, and Appalachian Tech. And I was on the boards. I saw a lot of that. You may or may not have much knowledge of that. But the merger of Southern Poly and KSU, do you have any specific knowledge about how that went on since you stayed experienced? And then, like, if you're willing to talk, because this will be for the record forever, talk about what happened with you and KSU.
So I'm not ready to do the latter part. Look, when I got to KSU, there wasn't money in the bank account. The academicians were concerned that I was a lawyer and not an academician. The biggest problem affecting KSU was, were we going to pay our bills? Were we going to keep our accreditation? With regard to the merger of the two schools, that was not handled smoothly. That was not handled positively. And it has taken numerous years to bring the two communities together. When I got there was still a lot of open sores and a lot of difficulty in that area. Sometimes speed is not an effective solution to a desired outcome, and that merger, in my opinion, was not handled well.
Would you address some of the specifics what were the bigger issues besides trying to push it too fast?
So I was dealing with a lot of problems where faculty at times from Southern Poly thought the students should be instant learners. There were not classes for students that had not previously taken calculus, for instance, in high school. You can't expect a student to do as well in the freshman class for calculus that hadn't had calculus at their high school. As a result of that, there was also not much in the way of teaching assistants or special sessions to help those students that needed extra assistance. The percentage of minority students that were failing out of their first year science courses were totally unacceptable. And some of the faculty thought if the students weren't up to it, they shouldn't be there. Other individuals thought the school had an obligation to not lower standards, but to provide extra assistance to help those students. I was in that camp, but it was tough making that change in a short time. If you made it a long time, too many students were going to fail that shouldn't have failed. I'm not saying if you take a final and you fail, you didn't fail. What I'm saying is do extra sessions. Give those students that didn't have high school calculus the opportunity to catch up. It was their obligation to spend that extra time, but give them that opportunity. So I felt that some of the statistics relating to minority students at Southern Poly was horrific. And I felt that the faculty were not properly taking care of those students.
When I went to Harvard, we did case study after case study, and we did lots of work on mergers, acquisitions. There's two things that happen that have to be addressed very carefully, and you can't rush these. One is the clash of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
The second is managing the leadership at the top. Dan Pat was selected. Lisa was not. And I had a conversation with Lisa later. She just about found out through the media that she didn't have a job anymore.
Right.
Well, quite that bad as I on the verge of that. So.
And you know, I've known Dan Papp for years. Dan is a great guy. Dan really sought to make huge positive change for KSU, to include post-merger. Some of Dan's senior officials served him really poorly. Some of the senior officials that preceded him as president didn't grow into their positions as the university grew. And to this day, I'm still amazed a couple of them weren't indicted. Because based on what I knew, I thought a couple of them should have been indicted. And I mean, when I first got there, there was a huge problem every day that we ran into. And it was due to about 3 senior individuals that had created major problems for that university.
Well, when I read the paper, and I'm not a lawyer either, but it looked like one of the guys that was taking money and then had another job, I can't remember his name, the way it was described in the paper, I wondered why he wasn't indicted somehow for some reason. So, Ty, anything we've been looking at video, anything that I've missed in the Q&A? Anything?
You've hit everything I wanted to cover. We covered Kennesaw State, we covered Brumby,
Yeah.
Kessel Stelling.
Yeah, you haven't said anything much about Kessel.
Well, you haven't asked
Well,
anything
I'm
about
ready.
Kess.
So tell us about Kessel Stelling, who was common in almost all the interviews.
You know, we were talking about Sonny Walker in the East Cobb Park. You know, there was a payment that was due to the bank as related to the acquisition of the family, the Tritt family's sale. And the leadership of East Cobb Park stated that they didn't have enough money for that payment. Kessel wrote that check. The bank didn't write the check. Kessel wrote that check. It was not a small payment. Kessel never publicly disclosed that payment. The naming of the current Chamber of Commerce building in honor of Johnny Isaacson, that was Kessel and John Williams. Their checks. Both of them have written many anonymous checks to improve our community. They don't come any nicer than Kessel. And he never seeks the credit. An amazing individual, great business leader, and very, very generous to everyone involved, never seeks the credit. You know, and then there was a longtime Georgia Power executive in Cobb County who thereafter led the Chamber of Commerce. And he was very giving to the community and very generous to the community too. You might know him. His name's David Connell. And he constantly gave back and supported the community and doesn't get enough credit for those opportunities.
Thank you. Here's something I'd like to get on the record. You probably remember it very carefully. Kessel found himself in a position where we had to fire the chamber executive before Bill and Don took over. And Kessel took 6 months off out of the bank to get the chamber back on target. He didn't have to do that. Probably cost him a lot of money. Talk a little bit about that since you have a legal background. They didn't prosecute the guy. I can't remember his name right now.
I don't remember the name, but we don't need to go there.
You go ahead, put that on the record.
Look, Kessel took charge of the Chamber of Commerce after an unfortunate incident where they needed to terminate the existing president of the chamber. That was just classic Kessel, a younger version of classic Kessel. Kessel always was there for the community. I want to say Kessel spent several years as chairman of the chamber years thereafter, just as frankly his protege Rob Garcia spent 2 years as chair of the chamber thereafter, where they needed that second year from a business leader.
Yeah, Kessel followed me. That was his second term. First term was in and around all that turmoil, and we knew that Don Beaver and Bill Cooper were at some point going to have to be asked to step aside. So the timing was off. The thought was Kessel understood how to go about doing that if necessary.
No, I mean, Kessel has been very generous to the community, never seeking the credit for the time, the lost income, and the actual checks that were tendered to assist the community. In Cobb County's modern day history, there have probably been like 5 people that were very, very generous over and over again. And he clearly was one of them.
Put on the record also that he went on to better things and eventually became, this last question for me, the president and CEO of Synovus, and then consolidated everything around Metro Atlanta into one building in Cobb County.
So when Kessel sold Riverside Bank to Synovus, little did we know the extent of the recession and the effect it would have on banking everywhere. And he went from becoming the head of the Bank of North Georgia, as it was then called, for Metro Atlanta, to the president and then CEO and then also chairman of Synovus. And as part of that, there was a lot of tough decisions, a lot of layoffs, a lot of financial considerations. The stock price plummeted. There were many calls for hang all the bankers, whether they had anything to do with the recession or not. And Kessel did exactly what we expected Kessel to do, was to finish every workday full of stress, full of concerns about his employees in the bank, and at the end of the day to succeed. And as a result of his leadership, Synovus is now in very strong position. He recently built a regional headquarters right at the Galleria. I tease some of the Synovus folks because as you're driving up north, to the left you have SunTrust Park, to the right you've got Synovus's regional corporate headquarters with a bright sign that reminds everyone that Synovus is right there. And he always looks out for his home community. Now, his real home community is Augusta, and he does nice things for Augusta too.
It was Columbus, right? You mean his home was Augusta?
He was born in Augusta. His dad was the CEO of the school system for years in Augusta, Richmond County. And he has family still in the Augusta area. But his career home, his professional home, has always been Cobb County. And he's always giving to this county.
Since this is going to be something when we finish, that's going to be around for years and years and years. Somebody the other day said when you're doing economic development work, if a company's really looking at the history of Cobb County, throw it to them and they will be able to tell who we were, where we came from, how we are. Is there anything for the record that you want to say that I haven't asked?
Well, I would simply say that when you talk about economic development, when you talk about growing the community, people will say anything. But this county does what it says. So over and over again, when companies were making the decision whether to come here, and they chose to come here, they were able 5 and 10 years down the road to say that Cobb County did exactly what they said they would do, and that they would always partner with you and assure as best as they could your continued success.
It's interesting you used to say that, because Ty and I tried to get John Sherholtz to tell us why at the media, Braves organization, how they had to finally say, yes, we're going to Cobb. And we asked it 3 or 4 different ways. And he came back to the same thing. It's just what you said. We wanted to stay in Georgia. Didn't have to. We wanted to stay in Georgia. This was the criteria we had. And there was no decision to make. The decision was in Georgia, not in Georgia. It's in Cobb County, not in the state of Georgia. And it wasn't really a decision. It was just obvious as to who you're looking at because of who Cobb County is.
But I would also add that the Braves have been a real class act. I remember when they had the announcement for the All-Star game for 2021, they invited the mayor of Atlanta. They talked about events in the city of Atlanta they were going to have as part of that weekend, so that it was not simply a Cobb County initiative, but a regional initiative. That was both classy and right. That you are the Atlanta Braves, so you represent the whole region, even if the facility is in Cobb. When the mayor of Atlanta was the chamber speaker last week, she specifically talked about how much she looked forward to the forthcoming All-Star game and working with the Braves. How soon the leadership of Atlanta has embraced the leadership of the Braves to work towards the better good. And that's due to the Braves reaching across to her.
Said something else that reminded me of another success. Cobb does what it says it's going to do. Atlanta United was going to another county that was offering rainbows and lollipops. And they knew Cobb County would do what it said it would do. It became real clear that other county probably wasn't.
Well, couldn't.
Or couldn't. So they weren't going to be able to do what they promised. So you want to say anything about that?
So look, when Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus have been amazing philanthropists and leaders for our state, not just the region. And their good works will last a long, long time. When DeKalb County offered more than the city of Marietta for the United, and it was clear that DeKalb County was going to have trouble doing what they said, it's my understanding that they went back to Marietta, and Marietta properly said, we will do exactly what we told you, but we're not renegotiating now. This is what we can do and we will do it. And the ownership said, let's close the deal. Often it's not he or she that offers the most, but once again, who will actually fulfill the commitment? And I think in credit to the city of Marietta, it's a great partnership between the Atlanta United and the city.
Well, it gets back to the Braves. The Braves organization, Mike Plant and maybe others, talked to Atlanta United and said, these people are for real. We've worked with them. Look at the success we have. If you come here, it may not sound like the biggest deal, but they're going to do what they said they were going to do. It's a class organization. So, anything else you want to put on the record?
No, sir. Probably bored you enough already.
No. We got great stuff to tie together with others. So, thank you, Sam.
My pleasure.
These are pretty much the questions we go along.
I hope you feel better.